Its expected vote of no confidence tonight on the government of Prime Minister Paul Martin. This is live from the CBC.
They tried 6 months ago and came as close as they possibly could.
The House tonight has been unable to reach a decision by majority vote.
But the opposition failed to bring down the minority Liberal government.
The report, of which I am the sole author, speaks for itself.
Now the first Gomery report is out, and the opposition says it's time to try again to bring down the Liberals. This time they're almost certain to succeed. And that will be the signal for a winter election.
Showdown in Parliament. From Ottawa, here is Peter Mansbridge.
And you're looking live inside the lobby outside the House of Commons, where members of Parliament are filing in to the House of Commons this evening, 15 minutes away from a vote that will defeat the Paul Martin government and will be off and running into a winter election campaign starting tomorrow. Here's the picture that shows it all, the winter scene and the Christmas lights. We haven't seen a moment like this in 25 years when MPs would be going to a vote at this time of year. Hello, I'm Peter Mansbridge. Certainly a sense of history in the air tonight as the government will fall on a question of confidence. A motion of no confidence moved by the Conservatives just last Thursday will be voted upon, as we said, coming up in about 13 or 14 minutes' time, and we'll cover that live. Our chief political correspondent, Keith Bogue, is with me tonight. A sense of history, but really not a sense of surprise.
No, in fact, one of the questions raised by a minority government the moment it's elected is how is it going to meet its end? I think what maybe is surprising about what we've seen over the last few months is how public the negotiation for the demise of the government has been, and a false start to boot. I mean, we've seen every sort of variation and posture on the part of the opposition trying to decide when the time was right. But it seems they have made that decision and they're about to pull the trigger.
Average length of a minority government in this country is a year and a half, about 18 months. This one has lasted around 17 months, so it's pretty well in the average. Let's go over to the House of Commons. Our Susan Bonner has been watching events throughout this day. She's watching them again, of course, at this hour. Sense of change of tone there in the last few hours as we get closer to the vote, Susan.
Absolutely, Peter. The air is crackling with anticipation here this evening. The men and women who come to work here every day and to stand up and vote here on occasion know that tonight is different from all other nights, and you could feel the sense of that building throughout the afternoon. Just a few moments ago, the official leader of the opposition, Stephen Harper, and his wife Loreen and their two children walked down the staircase just over my right shoulder here and went into the House of Commons. The bells are ringing now. MPs are going into their seats. The galleries are filled. Senators, political staff, anyone that can get in there to be a part of this historic night will. So no suspense, but absolutely there is drama in the air here. It is thick in the air here this evening.
All right, let's look at the actual wording of the motions. Very simple, just 9 words or so are the key words that will be voted upon by the full House, and that's it. That this House has lost confidence in the government. Sounds simple, but it's never happened before in this manner. Other minority governments, as Keith has mentioned, have fallen. That's the very nature of their life. They fall prey to opposition moves, but this is a question of no confidence that the opposition has bandied together, grouped together, and will defeat the government on. Our senior parliamentary editor, Don Newman, is of course the wizard on this hill in terms of parliamentary procedure and parliamentary intrigue, and he's with us again tonight. Don, that history is something I'm not sure Paul Martin wants attached to his name, but nevertheless he's going to get it in a few minutes' time.
That's right, and a lot of people thought perhaps he would try and find a way not to have it attached to his name, that he might in fact decide to go to the Governor General and just ask for an election without waiting for the vote, so that the history books 50 years from now won't say defeated in the House of Commons by the opposition parties. But he decided not to do that. I think instead he developed the strategy, we don't need an election, you're forcing a Christmas election and so on. And he decided to play that one out, and it is going to play out tonight. Now the interesting thing too is, of course, that while there is drama about the end of a minority government, it's also been clear for probably 3 weeks that this was the likely end to the minority government. Some people thought it would go up to December the 8th when the estimates were going to be voted on. But by and large, people are ready for this. They've been getting ready for quite a while. And so when the election comes tomorrow, it won't be like back, say, in 1979, Peter, when you were covering it, and bang, all of a sudden, boy, what do we do next? I mean, they're as ready as they could possibly be. They've got their buses and everything in place, and so while it is the end of a minority government, it's a bit of a different end for a minority government.
I'll say. Some would argue that it's been the longest drawn-out collapse in a long, long time. January 23rd is the date most people expect the election will be held on. That final date will not be decided until tomorrow morning when the Governor General receives the Prime Minister, who goes to Rideau Hall. They work out the schedule of all this. I know the Prime Minister must have in his mind which date he wants it. The arguments have centered around January 9th, 16th, or 23rd. The date of favor seems to be at this hour to be January 23rd. That's a long campaign, 56 days, 8 weeks. That's how long campaigns used to be 25 years ago. They've been shortened about 5 weeks since then. But this one, given the Christmas break, is likely to go a full 8 weeks, so get ready for lots of campaigning in your neighborhood over the next 8-week period, almost 2 full months. Quickly, we keep an eye on what's happening over at the House. We're still a few minutes away from the vote. MPs have been going in for the last 15 or 20 minutes. There you see some of the Liberal cabinet ministers, Carolyn Bennett there, heading into the House of Commons now. They will be filing in, taking their seats. Haven't actually heard the bells ringing yet. Oh, there they are in the background, calling MPs inside. So that vote's still a few minutes away. We can give you a sense of the mood of the nation as we approach this historic moment. CBC News has commissioned a poll with Environics, a research firm, one of the country's leading ones. And here are some of the preliminary numbers coming out of there. Well, they're not preliminary, they're real, but we have a lot of different numbers to tell you about over the next few hours. But these are some of the key ones. On the horse race, as they say, the decided voters, this is how it breaks down. According to the Environics poll, which was 1,600 people done during those dates, November 21st to 25th, margin of error 2.5 percentage points, plus or minus 19 times out of 20. Get all that out of the way, the real numbers, 35 for the Liberals, 30 for the Conservatives, 20 for the NDP, 14 for the Bloc. That's all based in Quebec, so obviously their number is very high in the province of Quebec. Moving on from decided voters, the Quebec numbers, look at them, 59% for the Bloc, 22 for the Liberals, the NDP and the Conservatives out of that race. What that breaks down to in seats, you can pocket a lot of, obviously, support in the regular Bloc seats, and that would, not necessarily mean a sweep of the province, which those numbers could look like for a lot of people. That's not likely to happen, but if the Bloc starts taking seats away from the Liberals in Quebec, that is a big problem for them in their overall plans. Moving on from there, the best Prime Minister question, asked of those polled, who do you think would make the best Prime Minister? 31% say Paul Martin, 20% say Stephen Harper, Jack Layton 15%, and Gilles Duceppe at 8 percentage points. Which is better, a majority government or a minority government? These numbers have fluctuated somewhat over the past couple of years. Around the time of the last election, there was a little more favor for a minority government than is showing here tonight. But at the moment, these numbers show that most people of those polled would like to see a majority government, a more stable situation, 44%, but 31%, nearly a third of those contacted, still feel a minority government is the way to go. Time for a change? Yes, say 47% of those contacted. Better, though, with the Liberals than a change to the Conservatives, 46%. So that's very much almost an even split, which is the question for a lot of people. Is this the time for a change? This is the staircase where the Prime Minister will be coming down from his office, which is in the floor just above the House of Commons entry point. That's not the Prime Minister. That, of course, is Stockwell Day coming down from his office. He uses the same staircase, the former leader of the Conservative Alliance, followed Preston Manning in the top role for the party on the right. So, poll results. While we await the arrival of the Prime Minister and the vote, Keith and Don, your thoughts. Keith, first of all, what do those numbers tell us?
Well, the top line numbers, I think, reveal something that is both obvious and surprising at the same time, and that is the parties that are forcing the election are not the same as the one that is on top in the polls. This is an unusual circumstance when there is that much of a gap between the party that wants the election and the one that doesn't. So the Liberals look in pretty much the same same shape, more or less a couple of points, as they were coming out of the last election. It's surprising, really, given everything that's happened between the last election and now, how little the poll numbers have changed. The other thing I think that's important to look at in terms of how the parties compare to each other is that each of the party leaders lags a little bit behind the party he leads in terms of popularity. But in the case of the Conservatives, Stephen Harper lags 10 points behind. That's a lot. And that, I think, indicates one of the key challenges that they will have to face during the campaign, and that is improving the image of their leader.
Don, your thoughts?
Interesting thing there is that the opposition parties, as Keith points out, they're not leading in any particular category that would guarantee them a government, and particularly the Conservatives, since they are the other main contender. But one has to assume that they believe that if they were to wait until next April, till the second Gomery report, and then basically 2 months after that, if you think about the Prime Minister's pledge to wait 30 days and then call an election, which would probably be a 35-day election, so 2 more months, that they'd be in even worse shape. And one of the reasons they want to go now is they think that if they wait any longer, the Liberals will have recovered completely from the Gomery experience. And that was why also they wanted to organize the vote so it came in early February rather than 2 months after the Gomery report, to at least see if the name Gomery, even though the report was pretty well good news for the Liberals, since it's mainly recommendations to make sure you don't have the same kind of sponsorship issue again, that if that were to happen, maybe they would get a little better bounce than they are going to get this time. So they're obviously going into an election where they're behind in all the major categories and where they know it's not even their preferred date when they can bring down the government. So they've had to do what they've had to do, and it's not really, when you look at our poll, a particularly good idea for them.
I was wondering about polls and the CBC. We can tell you that our policy will be the same as it was last time around. That's the last horse race poll you will see commissioned by the CBC during the campaign, which will officially begin tomorrow morning and run, of course, until whenever that date is in January. We won't be commissioning any polls, and we'll only be reporting on polls if they become major news events. We'll give you a weekly summary of what's been happening on the poll front, but we won't be commissioning any more as of this night. Let's go back over to the lobby outside the House of Commons. Still not voting yet, but Susan Bonner has a guess. Susan.
I do, Peter. You know, evenings like this draw people. There are people who just can't stay away from moments in history, and some of them actually have direct access to it. My guest is Senator David Smith. He is a Liberal, and he knows a lot about minority governments, and this is a night you wouldn't miss. You've seen a few evenings like this. Tell us why you're here and what you remember.
Well, it's history, and you know, I worked here in the 60s during Mr. Pearson's time. Saw all of that. And then 72 to 74, I saw that. I remember that one quite well. There may be some analogies there, you know, because in 72, the Liberals only had 2 more seats than the Conservatives. The NDP won 31. And in 74, when it was down to the 2 parties who was going to form the government, a lot of NDP supporters voted Liberal to stop the Conservatives. They dropped from 31 seats to 16. And that might be the kind of dynamics. I'm not saying that's happening, but these are the kind of dynamics that occur.
Now, we're not going to be too partisan here,
I'm
even though we're
trying not to
talking.
be too partisan.
Let's talk about this moment in history. This is not like the traditional fall of a minority government. We've seen this coming for 3 weeks, and so the suspense is not there. Does that change the dynamic in any way?
Well, I mean, it's not like the night when Chuck Cadman stood up. I mean, we have known where the Conservatives and the Bloc have been for quite some time. The only thing that's changed is Mr. Layton. And so once he announced that they were going to vote for the non-confidence motion, it's pretty clear what's going to happen. So it's not quite the same high drama, but it's still pretty exciting.
Well, you know, you've been an MP, you've done so much in political life. I get a sense that the men and women who are going to stand up and vote tonight really do know that what they're doing is unleashing a whole chain of events. Politics could look very different in just a few months from now in this country.
Well, it could, and part of the problem for either of the big 2 parties is to get a majority when you've got that big vote of Bloc seats in Quebec, and that's not apt to change. You know, there's probably going to be 50-some in there, and it makes it very difficult to get out of this minority period, which what happened in the past was they'd get fed up, want certainty, and go one way or the other. Whereas the math is very difficult this time, and this could be a watershed period.
Well, if you hurry, you can still get your seat in the gallery.
Okay.
Thanks for talking.
Okay, thanks.
So, Peter, there you have it. Someone who knows a lot about minority governments saying that we could see a lot more minority governments in our future.
Well, you know, David Smith referring to the 1960s, Keith, which was a period of minority governments. Diefenbaker first in 62 after he lost his big majority, then Pearson followed with two minorities in 63 and 65 before losing the leadership, well, retiring, and the leadership being taken by Trudeau and winning the majority in 68. Some interesting parallels there because, in effect, the Liberal Party and Pearson decided that his two goes, trying to win a majority and holding only a minority, were enough.
But the important difference that David Smith was pointing out is the existence of the bloc. We've never had a phenomenon like that, even with social credit in in Quebec.
Who weren't insignificant in the 60s.
They weren't insignificant, but they weren't winning 54 seats either. It's very difficult to assemble a majority in this country without Quebec. And the other thing that needs to be noted about that is that minority government also gives the bloc an opportunity to have an influence in Parliament, which actually increases its argument in Quebec to be re-elected. So when David Smith is talking about us going through perhaps a prolonged period where the struggle to form a majority government is always frustrated, it's time to take that very seriously. And the important part here was that in the Uniting the Right, which we talked so much about for 5 or 6 years, when they finally pulled that off, it really removed the camouflage of the Liberals' real problem, which is that they lost their base in Quebec to the Tories in '84, and they didn't recover it in 1993, and by that time the Bloc had soaked it up, and the electoral equation that they had counted on for so long was gone.
You know, the one thing I would caution everybody as we talk about we're going into a period of prolonged minorities is we are looking at a long campaign. 7, 8 weeks now ahead of us with, possible break at Christmas, although you can be sure that if someone's behind or worried about how they did at the beginning, they're not going to take too much time there during the Christmas break. But a long period, we all know the old saying, a week in politics is a long time, and it can be. The difference in the numbers right now is not very much. This poll and other ones we've seen in the past few days, 3, 4, 5 points, one showing the ECOS poll showing a 10-point spread or 9 or 10-point spread, but for the most part, a fairly small gap, one that can be changed quickly. And anything can be possible over the next 8 weeks. A major slip-up by any one party or party leader can lead to a push for votes on the other side. So things can move around.
And it's difficult to overstate how much Christmas complicates all of this. That makes the decisions that party managers have to consider in making election decisions very, very difficult. Do they really want to be in the face of voters? Campaigning in a hard, nasty election campaign at a time that is a festive time, a family time? Will they just get in the way? Will they annoy people more if they campaign hard there? Well, they don't know the answer to that question. And as you suggest, circumstances may compel them to do it. Also, with Christmas coming more or less smack dab in the middle of the campaign, it really affects the way they buy their election ads. Television ads, particularly television radio ads. That's why probably the decision to go for a longer campaign to the 23rd was made. There is a belief that almost this entire campaign is going to be compressed into the last 3 weeks after Christmas, and the first part won't matter very much. So imagine what it's like with all these competitive political parties, desperate to get a message to voters, all trying to buy advertising time in the same period. I mean, there are only 24 hours in any day, no matter what is going on with an election. But that really does make it a strategic challenge to find out where to place your ads and how often and so on. They've created a real problem for themselves with this Christmas business.
Well, that's what's going to make it all so exciting, right?
Sure.
They're still ringing the bells over at the House of Commons, a couple of minutes behind schedule here. They haven't started the vote. Obviously, you won't miss a moment when they start that. It'll be, first voter will be Stephen Harper because it was his motion of no confidence in the government that started all this last Thursday. The vote to take place any moment now. Don has been patient, listening to us on this issue of whether or not we're in a prolonged period of minorities. What's your thought on that?
I think we probably are. I think not only do we have the situation in Quebec, where if the Bloc are going to be able to get 50 or something like 50 seats, we also have the situation in the West where the Conservatives, particularly on the prairies, are very strong. There's the number of seats that are really in play are not all that many out of the 308. And so when you narrow down the number of seats in play and you already have a minority government, the chances of getting a majority really decrease. And so I think that we have to keep that in mind. And you have to remember, as back in the 60s. Well, the Creditistes had between 20 and 30 seats. There were only about 264 or 5 at that time in Parliament, so they had a significant number. Not as great as the Bloc Québécois, but I think the minority scenario is a likely one.
All right. Well, only time will tell, as they say. But lots of things can happen, as we said, in these next 8 weeks. Talking about, as Don has mentioned before on his program, 2 debates this time, Keith. It's not been finalized yet, but if there are, there'll be one in the east, one in the west, one in Vancouver, and one probably right here in Ottawa, one before Christmas, one after Christmas. Debates, as we all know, are often an entry point for many Canadians into the campaign. They may sort of not be that involved or interested as it begins. Once the debates are there, they start to sort of get involved. So those, we all know big things can happen in debate. Sometimes nothing happens in a debate except a lot of screaming. So those kind of things, and plus this issue of whether or not one stumbles. Though we are looking at 4 leaders who all had campaigns last time round, 3 of them their maiden campaign, so they've got that out of the way.
The stakes personally for the leaders are quite high. I think Jack Layton alone among the National Party leaders probably has a certain future in politics if he wants. Stephen Harper really needs to form a government this time. If he doesn't, his political career probably comes to an end. The same is likely true for Paul Martin, the Prime Minister, as well. If he loses government this time, then there will be serious thought about changing leaders. And if there is a minority, those questions about leadership become extremely complicated, because how can you be sure that you have time to fit in a leadership convention when a government could fall at any time? But those are the stakes, personally, that are on the table in this election.
And you'll hear questions raised about all those possibilities during the campaign of leaders about, what are they going to do if they don't win, and blah, blah, blah. But also, I think you'll hear perhaps more this time around than any other time before, with the likelihood, at least at this point, of another minority, pushing for answers from the leaders as to whether they would enter formal coalitions with smaller parties to give them a chance to govern for more than a short period of time. So that'll be interesting as well. Susan Bonner has been watching the MPs file in. She's almost alone there in the lobby outside the House, but they're still ringing the bells. What have you got for us, Susan?
Well, Peter, it's serious business that we're talking tonight. Taking down a government is serious work, but the Prime Minister seems to be in a playful mood. I'm told by my spies inside that he tried to get the packed press gallery to stand up and do a wave. The MPs in the House are going to do some very serious work in just a moment, but there's a lot of handshaking. It looks a lot like a cocktail party in there at this moment, and the Prime Minister, playful and trying to engage the press, didn't work.
Yeah, well, waves sort of went out of fashion about 10 years ago. I might want to let him know that, but he's a fan of sports events. There he was at the Grey Cup last night in Vancouver. Received the kind of welcome that a politician usually gets at a sporting event, which mixed with the boos sometimes outweighing the cheers. Let's look inside the House of Commons. They're letting us see inside there now. This is why we haven't been going there that often in the last few minutes, because it's not terribly exciting, as they're still saying the vote call. They've reached the time at which the vote was supposed to start. The bells now have stopped, so we assume the Speaker will be rising to ask for the vote on the opposition motion, confidence in the government. And here comes the formal process that begins the evening session here, and the vote that will take place. And pretty well everybody in the House tonight, they want to be there for the history, they want to be there for the moment. The government, this is not going to be a close vote. If everybody votes according to the way they said they were going to, it's going to be
I wish to advise honourable members
very one-sided in terms of the opposition parties.
The vote tonight.
The Speaker announcing there'll be a reception after the vote.
Members to exchange season's greetings. Tous les députés sont invités.
All members are invited.
La question est la suivante. Mr. Harper, seconded by Mr. Layton, moved that this House has lost confidence in the government. All those in favour of the motion will please rise.
So then, with
Mr. Harper. Harper.
With the vote, with Mr. Harper, Stephen Harper, the leader of the Conservative Party, the opposition, voting first in favor of the motion to vote no confidence in the government. Now, all the members of the Conservative Party will follow suit along that order, and we'll just keep a running total. If everyone's in their seat, given the vacancies that exist in the House, 153 votes would topple the government tonight. We expect the number to be much higher than that. But keep an eye. When it passes that number, you will know with no doubt that the government is about to be defeated. The votes will continue, though. All the parties will vote. The Conservatives, the NDP, the Bloc, all those who support the motion will vote first, and those who do not support it, in other words, the Liberals, will vote second. But by then, it literally is all over but the county.
Mr. Komarnicki.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Thompson, New Brunswick Southwest.
Mr. Thompson, New Brunswick Southwest.
Mr. Pallister.
Mr. Pallister.
Mr. Menzies.
Mr. Menzies.
Ms. Georges.
Ms. Georges.
For about a couple of dozen of the MPs, this is their last time round in the House. They won't be running again. They've chosen not to. They're retiring from this level of politics. So for them, it is a special night. Some familiar faces
Mr. Goldring.
Mr. Goldring.
Mr.
who have chosen not to be back again, or not to
Mr. Brightcreitz.
Mr. Cassidy.
run in a race that would put them back in if they won.
Mr. Cummins.
Mr. Forsyth.
Mr. Forsyth.
Mr. Ritz.
Mr. Ritz.
Mr. Hanger.
Mr. Hanger.
Mr. Harris.
Mr. Harris.
Mr. Batters.
Mr. Batters.
Mr. Allison.
Very different tone on the Conservative side than there was not that long ago. In the spring, when the vote took place, it was so close, settled by the Speaker's breaking the tie vote, after Chuck Cadman, the independent MP, voted with the government to defeat the opposition motion and kept the Martin government in power for another almost half a year.
Mr. Fitzpatrick. Mr. Keddy. South Shore St. Margaret.
Mr. Keddy, South Shore St. Margaret.
Mr. Lunny.
Mr. Lunny.
Mr. DeVolen.
Mr. DeVolen.
Mr. Lukivsky.
Mr. Lukivsky.
Mr. Goodyear.
Mr. Goodyear.
Mr. Schellenberger.
Almost halfway to the number they need. Once again, they need 153 at least,
Mr. Merrifield.
or at most, actually, to defeat the government.
Mrs. Greywall, Fleetwood Port Kells.
Mrs. Greywall, Fleetwood Port
They won't get there with just the Conservative vote.
Mr. Brown, Leeds Grenfell.
Mr. Brown, Leeds
But they probably will with the
Mr. Bazan.
Bloc
Bazan.
and
Mr.
perhaps a
Cramp,
couple from the
Prince Edward
NDP.
Hastings.
Mr. Cramp, Prince Edward Hastings.
Mr. Thompson, Wild Rose.
Mr. Thompson, Wild Rose.
Mr. Stinson.
Mr. Stinson. They're standing up and applauding there, Peter, for Darrell Stinson, who is one of the members of the Conservative caucus, who was stricken with cancer. And I'm told that he was unable to fly here from the West Coast, that he actually drove so that he could be here for this vote. And that must have taken 4 or 5 days. Mr. Gout.
Dave Chatters, another one of the Conservative MPs who has not been well, but is here for the vote.
Mr. Schmidt, Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Johnston.
Mr. Johnston.
Mr. Hebert.
Mr. Hebert.
Mr. Jean.
Mr. Jean.
Mr. Kemp, Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge Mission.
Mr. Camp, Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge Mission.
Mr. Miller.
Mr. Miller.
Monsieur Poilievre.
Monsieur Poilievre.
Mr. Preston.
Mr. Preston.
Mr. Epp.
Mr. Epp.
Mr. Tilson.
Mr. Tilson.
Mr. Trost.
Mr. Trost.
Mr. Warawa.
Mr. Warawa.
Mr. Watson.
Mr. Watson.
Mr. Penson.
Mr. Penson.
Mr. White.
Mr. White.
Randy White giving the wave as well. He's out of here after tonight. The leader of the Bloc Québécois. Gilles Duceppe now leads his party in support of the Conservative motion.
Madame Lalonde.
Madame Lalonde.
So you can add another 50 or so seats here.
Monsieur Sauvageau.
Monsieur Sauvageau.
Monsieur Bachand.
Monsieur Bachand.
Monsieur Ménard Hochelaga.
Monsieur Ménard Hochelaga.
Monsieur Côté.
Monsieur Côté.
Madame Picard Drummond.
Madame Picard Drummond.
Monsieur Guimont.
Monsieur Guimont.
Madame Gay.
Madame Gay.
Monsieur Plamondon.
Monsieur Plamondon.
Madame Saint-Hilaire.
Madame
Mr.
Saint-Hilaire.
Plamondon, the Bloc MP, you saw just voting there a moment ago. He's likely to, if he's re-elected, and most people assume he will be, he would come back here as at least the second longest serving member of Parliament. The longest serving Bill Blakey of the NDP expected also to be re-elected, sort of the Dean of the House. But there's certain irony in that. If Blakey loses, it'll be Plamondon, member of the Bloc Québécois, who becomes the Dean of the House of Commons. first elected as a Tory in '84 and then moved to the Bloc in '90.
Madame Thibault, Rimouski-Neigette, Témiscouata-les-Basses. Monsieur Lemay. Monsieur Lemay. Monsieur Bouchard. Monsieur Bouchard. Monsieur Cléry. Monsieur Cléry. Madame Bonson. Madame Bonson.
Well, they're edging ever closer to the number they need for sure.
Madame Brunel. Madame Demers. Madame Demers. Monsieur Simard, Beauport-Limoilou. Monsieur Simard, Beauport-Limoilou.
But to give you a sense that this is going in only one direction, there aren't this many Liberals in the House, so the NDP would have to have a dramatic change of heart to make a difference here in this vote tonight. But as soon as you see Jack Layton stand, which will be in a few moments, the goose is cooked for the Liberals. The government will fall to defeat on this motion. And there he is.
Mr. Blakey. Mr. Blakey.
So the opposition fulfills its threat. It is united in its opposition to the government and united in support as it passes that 153 number. Government, the non-confidence vote has passed. The Liberal government will fall. They haven't even voted yet. They will go through the formality of voting against this motion. Ed Broadbent giving his wave, the former leader of the NDP. He won't be running again either.
Mr. Martin, Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Martin, Winnipeg Centre.
Ms. Crowder.
Ms. Crowder.
Mr. Comartin.
Mr. Comartin.
Mr. Massey.
Mr. Massey.
Mr. Christopherson.
Mr. Christopherson.
Mr. Julian.
Mr. Julian.
Mr. Cullen, Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Cullen, Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Angus.
So as we say, this comes as no surprise. It's been sort of this spiral towards this moment over the last, well, 6 months really. There was a tease in the spring, but this is it. The minority government of Paul Martin has been defeated tonight in the House of Commons. Tomorrow, the Prime Minister visits Rideau Hall, goes to Rideau Hall to visit the Governor-General. Pat Martin, the former Liberal, sitting as an independent, getting the acknowledgement of his colleagues here, as it's also his decision not to run again. There he is, the Prime Minister for the last 17 months. Actually, for a little longer than that, but in this particular government, for the last 17 months, will now run in his second campaign as leader of the Liberal Party and try for re-election. Having been defeated in the House of Commons, the first time in the history of the country that a government has fallen on a straight question of non-confidence.
Monsieur Baudrillard.
Monsieur Baudrillard.
Mr. Bevilacqua.
Mr. Bevilacqua.
Madame Poula.
Madame Poula.
Ms. Carroll.
Ms. Carroll.
Mr. Alcock.
Mr. Alcock.
Mr. Graham.
Mr. Graham.
The front bench of the Liberal Party, the cabinet members,
Madame Robillard.
Monsieur Lapierre
who
Outremont.
now spent most of the last week, many of them fanning across the country to announce and defend new programs that have been announced, billions of dollars worth in the past few weeks alone. Now will be heading to their ridings to seek re-election.
Mr. Efford.
Mr. Volpe.
Mr. Volpe.
Mr. Anderson Victoria.
Mr. Anderson Victoria.
Mr. Camuzzi.
Mr. Camuzzi.
Mr. Macaulay.
Mr. Macaulay.
Monsieur De Villers.
Monsieur De Villers.
Peter, there's David Anderson, the former Environment Minister. He's not running again, and nor is Peter Paul Lavalier down next to him.
Ms. Mina.
Monsieur Paradis.
Monsieur Paradis.
Monsieur Coder.
Monsieur Coder.
Mr. Godfrey.
Mr. Godfrey.
Ms. Bennett.
Ms. Bennett.
Mr. McGuire.
So while there's a lot of history in the room, there's a lot of emotion there as well. Linda Stronach voting in favor of the government, obviously, Liberal cabinet minister now, Conservative just a few months ago. But as we said, a couple of dozen MPs from all sides leaving the House for the last time tonight, and many others may well be leaving the House for the last time as well tonight, because they'll seek re-election and not win it, as Claudette Bradshaw, another Liberal minister who won't be running again. But it's a certainty that members of Parliament from all parties run the risk, obviously, when they put themselves up for re-election of not succeeding in that venture. So they'll all be looking around the room tonight wondering if they'll be back in a couple of months to occupy their seats again, and which side of the House they'll be sitting on when they do that.
Mr. Lee.
Ms. Finney.
Ms. Finney.
Everybody looks in a pretty good mood tonight, no matter which side of the house they're sitting on, Keith, which is also another stark departure from the spring, where the Liberals look elated and the Tories look stunned.
Well, I mean, this outcome was foreseen, and also the Liberals, I think, have gained a lot of confidence from their ability to come back from what they went through last spring. They haven't really been as down in the polls or public opinion at all as they were in April when the testimony from the Gomery inquiry first hit front pages of newspapers across the country. And they are, in talking to them, you know that they are emboldened by their experience in coming back from that, and that they do go into this with a fair amount of confidence. There's a lot of emotion in the House. I can tell you our Julie Van Dusen is there watching it, and she's getting messages from MPs there about what's going on the floor. There are a lot of tears out there. There were from Darrell Stinson when he got that standing ovation, and as you can see, people who are seeing the end of their political career and saying goodbye to the House, they won't ever be sitting in this Parliament again, are quite emotional about it.
Mr. Maloney.
Monsieur Patry.
Mr. Patry.
Mr. St. Dennis.
Mr. St. Dennis.
Mr. Steckley.
Mr. Steckley.
You know, we tend to paint all politicians with a brush that can be awfully harsh at times, and that's sometimes it's fair, often it is not. A lot of these people go into public life for all the right reasons, to try and make life better for all of us. This is one of those nights where they, they leave this place with a degree of uncertainty about whether they'll be coming back. Some know it for sure, others, as we said, don't.
Monsieur Thibault, West Nova.
Mr. Thibault, West Nova.
Mr. Malley.
Mr. Malley.
Mrs.
But that's perhaps why the Speaker said before the vote started, there'll be a reception in my chambers later for all MPs.
Monsieur Simard, Saint-Boniface.
Mr. Simard, Saint-Boniface.
Mr. Lestuca.
So the numbers you're looking at now, once again, pretty well have no real impact except to go into the history books as the final numbers on the night the government of Paul Martin is defeated on a matter of no confidence.
Madame Folco.
The election will be set tomorrow, expected to be January 23rd, could be a week earlier than that, could be 2 weeks earlier than that, but the betting here in the nation's capital throughout this day has been that the government has made its decision that it wants to go to the people on the 23rd of January. As we all know, that's usually such a warm and sunny day in our country, so it should be fun. Tina Augustine, the Liberal MP, who has decided in the past few days that she won't be running again, and the reason that's been fairly prominent around here is because Michael Ignatieff, the Liberal, who says he will be running for that particular riding, will have to seek and win the nomination. He was acclaimed, was he, today? So that is now set, but it hasn't come without some dispute and some concern on the part of Liberals in that particular riding in the Toronto area. So it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out.
Mr. McGinty.
Mr. McGinty.
Mr. Powers.
Mr. Powers.
Ms. Ratansi.
Ms. Ratansi.
Monsieur Rodriguez.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Mr. Rota.
Mr. Rota.
Mr. Savage.
Mr. Savage.
So the Liberal benches seemingly ready to hit the campaign trail. They got their lines ready. They'll be meeting in caucus in the next few minutes, actually, with the Prime Minister. Paul Martin has said he won't be. Carolyn Parrish, the independent MP, formerly Liberal, you remember her from the issues. There are the final numbers, 171 to 133. The government falls on a question of confidence. A historic moment in the Canadian Parliament. It's never happened before. Governments have fallen in minority situations, but not on a straight question of confidence.
Pour 171, 171. Nays contre 133, 133.
Je déclare la motion adoptée.
So the motion is adopted, the papers fly in the air, the government's been defeated. The Speaker will now go through the process of what happens next. Only one MP missing tonight from his or her seat. It was a Bloc Québécois member. The other missing numbers that add up to a total of 308 are vacant seats. And the Speaker, who of course did not need to vote because it wasn't a tie. So that's it. somewhat similar to that night in December of 1979 when the Clark government fell, although there was a lot more paper throwing and a lot more yelling. This one, I think they've been doing the yelling and the paper throwing for weeks, if not months now. They've been pretty used to it. This formalizes what happens. And you see that, more often than one tends to think. Members from across the House shaking hands, embracing. They've been political opponents and harsh ones, but this is a moment that's common to them all. They all head now to the campaign trail, those who've chosen to run again. They all know what that feeling is like, how difficult that can be, and so they share a common bond at times like this. But the government has lost the confidence of Parliament, and that's it. You won't see this Parliament in session anymore, except for a brief period tomorrow morning when the formality happens of the Prime Minister explaining to the House that he has seen the Governor-General and the election has been called. But lots to come in the next few minutes. We should hear from most of the party leaders. They'll be going out to what we call the unimics, where they go out to speak to all reporters just outside. Some have chosen only to speak in their caucus, but have allowed cameras in, so we'll hear from the Prime Minister in that manner in the next couple of moments. Quick thoughts from Don and Keith and Susan, who have been witnessing all this. Oh, first of all, here's Gilles Duceppe. Let's go to him first of all. He's at the Unimic.
Qui est en cause, et en raison de cela et du scandale des commandites, le gouvernement de Paul Martin, le gouvernement libéral,
because of the sponsorship scandal,
morale pour gouverner.
the government no longer has the confidence of the House, and this party has gone beyond the most elementary democratic rules. They tried to buy the conscience of Quebecers with our own money, and what is even worse, they didn't learn anything from the sponsorship scandal, because for the past 2 weeks they're trying to buy us again with our own money, once again, with all kinds of promises to the tune of $40 billion. So it's not up to Mr. Justice Gomery to sanction the party, it's up to the people to do that. And it is Quebecers that are going to be passing a judgment, and a very harsh one, on the Liberal Party of Canada. What does this enable you to do now that you couldn't have done before? Well, the Prime Minister, first of all, eliminated the opposition days to the opposition parties last spring. I mean, this is a manipulation of democratic rules. We could have then overthrown the government. And secondly, he promised to hold an election 30 days after the second report of the Gomery report, provided for December 30th originally. So we gave him a third chance by saying the NDP proposal to have an election at the beginning of January, as he promised to have done so. Well, I mean, enough is enough, and we see that people are playing around with the rules. The two other opposition parties just realized what the Bloc Québécois had for a long time. Do you think that it's going to be a very harsh judgment from the people? Well, I'm optimistic to this point. I take nothing for granted because, after all, to win before you've waged a battle is being despicable to the people. If we want the people to give us our trust, well, then we have to be worthy of it. And that means meeting the people and convincing them, explaining our point of view, debating it. And for that reason, we've taken nothing for granted. We have to work very hard. It's right and holds true for life and in politics.
The Bloc Québécois leader, Gilles Duceppe, his reaction to the defeat of the government tonight, he seems to be mostly concerned about how his party will fight this upcoming campaign. All the polls giving them a significant, if not amazing, lead in the province of Quebec. They should win at least the seats they have if those numbers hold up, if not more. What he is saying, of course, is that they've got to not take anything for granted. They're going to have to campaign hard. While we wait for Stephen Harper, Paul Martin and Jack Layton, let's go through that promised whip around. Keith, your thoughts first.
Well, just listening to Gilles Duceppe, I couldn't help wondering, like in a 56-day campaign, which is what it will be if the election day is January 23rd, what does the Bloc do? They've got only 75 ridings to worry about. They're safe in most of those things. They could probably spend a couple of days each in all of the ridings that they really need to contest. And it's an example of just how different an election campaign is for the Bloc Québécois. And they have a tremendous advantage in this campaign because of the new election spending rules as well. They have essentially an election funding formula designed for a national campaign, and they'll be running only a regional campaign. Anyway, that's my thoughts on listening to Mr. Duceppe. I think it's going to be a bit of a problem for him to fill the time.
All right, Don.
Well, interesting watching the vote and the conclusion of the vote. Now, remember back in May, we also got into the Liberal caucus room and we got into the Conservative caucus room, and the leaders made their speeches there, really public speeches, in private rooms. But interestingly enough, when the vote was announced, the Prime Minister didn't get to his feet, as the tradition would call, and say, well, I've heard the will of the House and I'll be seeing the Governor General tomorrow. He didn't, I guess, want to give anybody that picture. He didn't want to seem to be defeated. And he is going to walk into the caucus room now, and I predict he will talk as though he won. He will not talk as though he was defeated. He did not want to have the vision of the Liberals being defeated in the House, even though we saw what the numbers were. It's kind of a funny way to look at it. But this is very interesting because they've had so much time to lay it out. They've had the 2 or 3 weeks they knew it was going to happen. The strategy is probably to go in and claim victory, complain that they have to have an election they didn't want and Canadians don't want, but to be very upbeat rather than defeated.
Well, you're right, because when you look back to the 79 example, which is the only one we can go with in terms of the recent past, the last time a minority government fell, the image you have most often is, you know, the vote numbers followed immediately by Clark standing there and saying that he would be visiting the Governor General the next morning after the government's defeat. You're right, Paul Martin did not say that, so we'll watch with interest the remarks he gives his caucus, which we'll be covering live in just the next few moments' time. Now, I don't know whether we have access to Susan or whether she's chasing somebody in the lobby. Yes, we do. Susan, what's the mood in there now that it's all over?
Well, I can tell you, just picking up on the Prime Minister's point, that, you know, he flew up those stairs about as fast as I've ever seen him take the staircase and headed into his office. And he'll take another staircase down in the middle of the building to get into the caucus later. His MPs and MPs from the other parties are pouring out. There's a bit of a party atmosphere here now. We're working, but a lot of the MPs are going to the Speaker's party that we heard a little bit about. And the election campaign is on. Official or not, the Governor General may not have issued the writs yet, but as far as the MPs are concerned, the hard part begins for them now. They've got to go and fight to win the right to be back here when MPs return next February.
And just behind Susan, Gilles Duceppe is talking to reporters. We heard from him already. We're waiting to hear from Harper, Layton, and Paul Martin. They're going to do their moments of speaking at the microphones in their caucus rooms, as Susan mentions. This is where all MPs gather, members of Parliament, House of Commons, and the Senate, and some of the staff. Let's have a look inside those rooms. This first one we're going to take a peek inside is the Liberal caucus room. And, well, perhaps we're not quite ready to show you that. But at the moment, Paul Martin hasn't arrived there yet anyway. There it is, but many of his MPs have. There's Scott Bryson there, looks like him, yeah. The former Progressive Conservative, now Liberal Cabinet Minister. And he's waiting along with everybody else. There's Finance Minister Ralph Goodale in the background. His mini budget just a couple of weeks ago has had everyone talking, and Liberals handing out money in different places across the country for different projects. That's the Liberal caucus room. This is the Conservative caucus room. Certainly a nice, very good close-up of the microphones that Stephen Harper will be talking at. And they, you know, as all the parties will do to make their leader look prime ministerial, which is what this is all about at this point now as we enter a campaign, have the flags in array at the background, ready to be the backdrop for Stephen Harper. So that's a peek inside these rooms. The caucus members getting there. You can be sure that it will be a carefully crafted event. Jack Layton, though, will be speaking to reporters right in front of the House of Commons. Here he is now.
Au printemps, les néo-démocrates ont mis de l'avant de bonnes idées.
In the spring, the New Democrats put forward very good ideas. These were good ideas, wanting results for the Canadian people. This fall, the New Democratic Party also put forward good ideas, but unfortunately this time, the Liberals said no.
In the spring, the New Democrats put forward good ideas to get things done for people. Those ideas were accepted, and we had some positive results. In the fall, we once again proposed good ideas on key issues, but unfortunately, the Liberals said no. Just as they said no to a very reasonable compromise regarding the setting of an election date in January after the holiday season. As a result of the stubbornness of the Liberals and the inflexibility that we've seen, we will be starting an election tomorrow. After the NDP had ensured that some key bills have passed through the House and that the First Minister's meeting with Aboriginal people took place. Tomorrow we'll be entering an election that is wide open because there is a positive option that people can have available to them other than the Liberal broken promises and corruption and the Liberal wrong-headedness on the issues.
The new Democratic Party obtained increased investments for the province of Quebec for 12 months, and much more than the Bloc Québécois did in 12 years. So we have something very positive to offer Quebecers.
Get results in the Parliament because they saw us putting this Parliament to work, and we're proud of that record. We intend to take to the electorate the proposition that more New Democrats will get more good things done. The election starts tomorrow, but I'm happy to answer your questions this evening.
What's this campaign going to be about?
Mr. Layton, weren't you a little bit naive to think that... I didn't understand your question. Weren't you a little bit naive to see all the Liberals making such promises? Well, we asked the Liberals to do something to improve the budget. We accomplished a lot by asking changes to the budget last fall. We tried to force the Liberals to do something because there was an awful lot at stake. Our health care system, which was established by the New Democrats, but the Liberals refused. And so therefore, we can't have confidence in such a government, and that is the reason why we have an election.
Well, this election is going to be about electing members of Parliament that can get something done for people. I think people have seen a lot of political games, but what they do know is that New Democrats came here to get a job done. And we produced results, both in the spring with the budget and in terms of trying to bring forward positive ideas here in the Parliament. I don't for a moment think, for example, that we would have had Canada staying out of missile defence if we'd had a majority Liberal government. There's a number of very positive things that the NDP has contributed, including this most recent proposal for the holding of the election after the holidays. Unfortunately, the Liberals have this streak of entitlement or arrogance that prevents them from working in a minority parliament with other parties, and that has got to be addressed in the election by electing more New Democrats.
How many seats do you want to win, Mr. Layton? Well, we aren't speaking about numbers of seats, but I can tell you that we really have a choice this time. We know what the New Democratic Party has said. They want to do things, concrete things for the people, to work hard, to accomplish results. We have Liberals with what their balance sheet is, corruption, broken promises, and we have the Conservative Party that don't share their ideas with the majority of Canadians. So the choice is a clear one, and it's up to people to feel free this time.
And the private clinics. Mr. Emerson says you're simple-minded, your party is simple-minded on terrorism, and Dosan said that on clinics he's doing everything he can to stop these clinics from spreading. What do you say to those things?
Well, Mr. Dosanjh is not doing anything to prevent the spread of private for-profit medicine in this country. We have seen a very rapid growth in for-profit medicine under the tenure of the Liberals, and that's a record they're going to have to try and defend. We tried to have them change the laws and the rules to prevent the...
Jack Layton's comments, followed now by Paul Martin's arrival inside the Liberal caucus room. Prime Minister, for the past 17 months in this Parliament, about 7 months before that as he took over from Jean Chrétien in the last Parliament, now heads to the campaign trail once again. Members of his parliamentary caucus, that's House of Commons MPs and senators, would be in that room. Imagine some staff people will be in there as well. So this is the first time he will speak to his MPs since the defeat of the government. And the signals he sends now are crucial to the Liberal campaign as it sets out tomorrow, after the Prime Minister has met with the Governor General and set the official campaign date. Let's hear what he has to say.
All right.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. All right. All right. Okay. Oh, Sam. All right. Let's get started here. Let's get started. Time's a-wasting. All right. Hey, we got a campaign to run. Hey, come on. All right. Okay. Hey, you're going to get tired before the campaign starts. All right. Okay. All right. Let me just. Well, this is a very special caucus. There seem to be a lot. Who are all those people at the back of the room? Same. All right, all liberals. I just want to say a few brief words to you all before you head back to your ridings to get fitted for snowshoes. First, I don't care. Have you worn snowshoes, Sam? Yeah, right. First thing that I want to say is that all of us, we have a lot to be proud of, and I cannot tell you how proud I am of you. I cannot. Okay. All right. I cannot tell you how proud I am of all that you have done over the course of the past 17 months. You have made the Liberal Party proud. You have made Canadians proud, and I am very proud of all of you. All right. Now, the vote in the House of Commons did not go our way tonight, and as a result, surprise, and as a result, I will see the Governor General tomorrow morning. But the decision, they will judge us and they will judge our performance, just as they will judge the alliance among the neoconservatives, the separatist bloc, and the NDP. Nous entrons dans cette campagne avec tout un bilan.
We are entering this campaign with a balance sheet, and we can be proud of it. Our economy is a strong one, with the lowest rate of unemployment in Canada for the past 30 years. We introduced our plan to reduce taxes for Canadians, a $30 billion reduction over a 5-year period in order to contribute to collective prosperity.
After 10 years of conservative mismanagement, we have paid down $60 billion in debt. We have delivered 8 straight budget surpluses, helping to keep the economy strong for Canadians, and there is no other G7 country that can say that. Today in Canada, inflation is low, interest rates are low, it's easier to buy a home, it's easier to get a job, and that is the result of the hard work and the good management of a Liberal government. But let's go on. We have reached agreements with all of the provinces to build a national program of early learning and child care so that future generations of Canadians will have the best possible chance to succeed. We have delivered on our New Deal for cities and communities, for better public transit, and for more vibrant municipalities. We have brought forth a plan that makes sure that any young Canadian who wants a post-secondary education can get one. And last week, we concluded with the nation's Aboriginal leadership and all of the provinces and territories an unprecedented agreement with clear targets and objectives to close the gap in health care, in education, and in housing between Aboriginal Canadians and all Canadians. And we are now the leaders of a major international conference under the auspices of the United Nations, in which Canada is saying to the world, we will indeed come together to make sure that the planet is safe for the generations to come, that there will be, in fact, a reduction in CO2 emissions,
that we will confront the whole issue of climate change, and Canada is now the conscience of the world. We have worked to maintain solidity in our healthcare system, to reduce waiting lists for patients, to have better care, with an investment of $41 billion over a 10-year period. In a nutshell, we have a very impressive balance sheet, and it's our intention to go even further, to build from these successes, to work with all the citizens of Canada, because it's together that we will succeed.
Now tonight, the opposition decided that forcing an election was more important than establishing benchmarks to reduce wait times for health care. They decided that forcing an election was more important than giving middle-income Canadians the full benefit of our tax cuts. Well, let me tell them that they can explain themselves to Canadians. Because as Liberals, we will go into every riding in this land, and we will say to the people of our country, you have a real stake in this election. The outcome is going to matter in your life, because the Canada that is imagined by Stephen Harper and the Conservatives is starkly different from the Canada that we want to build. Stephen Harper sees no positive role for government, not in improving the lives of Canadians, not even in standing up for Canada. He has been silent. He has been silent as we have defended Canadian workers against the Americans on softwood lumber, such a vital issue, and yet Stephen Harper has had nothing to say. And let's not forget that this is the man who said last week, don't challenge Andre Boisclair, don't challenge the separatists. Well, let me tell you something, Stephen Harper. You made an alliance with the Bloc, not me, and I will never shy away from defending our country and saying to Quebecers, your brightest future lies with Canada.
The Bloc Québécois wants only one thing, a referendum to divide us and break up our country. Well, we're going to do everything against that plan because federalism does work. Let's look at the agreements we signed with the province of Quebec on cities and communities, on daycare, on parental leave, and on the international scene, on cultural diversity, where Quebec and the Canadian government have worked hand in hand to ensure the success of our diversity and the wealth of our country. The Bloc Québécois seems that they want to fight for Quebec. But what are they fighting for Quebec against? Against a strong economy, against good jobs, against a good quality of life, the dynamic attitude of Canada that succeeds in the world. The Bloc Québécois wants us to live through the upheaval of a referendum. But ask them if the world is going to wait for us. Our competitors are not within our borders. Our competitors are outside of our borders. It's together that we have to confront them. It's not the time to divide us. We will win.
In this campaign, we will hear nothing but pessimism from the opposition. And there's a reason for this. That's all that they have to offer. They have no positive agenda for Canada. They have nothing good to say, nothing to build on. And that is the fundamental difference between us. We see Canada's promise, and we're determined to build on it. We will fight for a Canada where no one is left behind, where all are able to contribute. We will fight for a Canada that never strays from the values on which this country was built. Respect for each other, fairness towards each other, a shared commitment to helping all Canadians seize their potential, the Charter of Rights. Let me close by saying one message. We will fight to move our country forward, not backward. That is our pledge. And now let's get out and spread the word.
Paul Martin speaking to his supporters, his MPs, senators, staff people in the Liberal caucus room tonight, playing every card you can expect to hear coming out of the Liberal campaign platform, the trade card, the economy card, the healthcare card, and the national unity card, going with the Liberal track record. You didn't hear, obviously, anything about the Gomery inquiry. That will be played, the card played most often, one can assume, from the opposition parties. You saw Stephen Harper speaking to his supporters just a moment ago while Martin was speaking. We will give you the entirety of Mr. Harper's remarks as well. But let's just first comment a little bit on what Paul Martin had to say. Keith Bogue, listening to the Prime Minister, getting it on terms of how they're going to play their particular record. Also, it was interesting to see the way he described the union of other parties that brought his government down tonight, calling the Conservatives the neocons, the Bloc Québécois, the separatist bloc. The NDP was the only one he described with the name that they're generally associated with, the NDP. What should we make of that?
Well, First of all, I think you got to be very careful how you handle the NDP vote. I think that every indication, including our poll, is that this election campaign is going to look very much like the last campaign. And that means that the Liberal message is going to be that you may want to change, but it's really too risky to change to that party, meaning the Conservative Party. That message is aimed most specifically at those people who might be tempted to vote for the NDP because they're maybe disappointed with the Liberals. And it's quite clearly an attempt to try to frighten them into coming back to the Liberals. And it was very effective in the last campaign. The NDP suffered mightily from that. And in fact, when you talk to them on background, they grudgingly congratulate the Liberals for the effectiveness with which they were able to use that message to drive down the Liberal vote and rescue a minority out of a difficult situation. And clearly they intend to try that strategy again.
Well, I think we probably saw the bare bones of what the Liberal message is going to be in terms of this campaign, and probably a good sense of what the stump speech the Prime Minister is going to give in town after town, community after community across the country in a campaign that will start tomorrow, as he said, after he visits the Governor General. No hint on the date from the Prime Minister tonight, but the assumption is it's going to be January 23rd. Now, the Martin speech will be interesting to listen to for the very same reasons. He will probably give us a sense tonight of what their message is going to be over these next 7 or 8 weeks in his remarks, but one can assume there's no doubt we're going to hear about Gomery in his speech.
That's absolutely true. I mean, the Martin campaign, as you suggested before, emphasizes the economic record because the economy can be the strongest issue determining elections. When it's bad, it's really tough for the government in power. When it's good, other issues come into play. And that's the way Stephen Harper's going to have to go at this campaign. He needs to make the Gomery issue, the sponsorship scandal, an even bigger issue than it has become. And I say that because as effective as it has been in causing trouble for the Liberals, it has not done what it's needed to do to boost support for the Conservatives or for their leader, Stephen Harper. And he needs to find a way to burst through that sort of 30% level that's been difficult for him to crack in the last election and in polls this fall as well.
Now, before we show those Harper remarks before his caucus, your thoughts on what we heard from Jack Layton before the Prime Minister's remarks?
Well, I think that Jack Layton has a very, very clear strategy. He has to emphasize what it was that the NDP was able to accomplish in a minority government. They took a chance when they made a deal with the Liberals in the spring where they were able to rescue the government at the price of the almost $5 billion in extra spending for social programs. They need to emphasize that that was productive work that people would approve of and that there can be more of that if the NDP is returned to Parliament with something that could give them power, if not government. In other words, the balance of power. In other words, more seats.
All right. Stephen Harper talking to his supporters tonight in the Conservative Party caucus room. Let's hear how he phrased it.
Thank you very much, friends. Thank you very much, friends, chers amis. This has been an historic evening in this Parliament, in this country. This is not just the end of a tired, directionless, scandal-plagued government. It's the start of a bright new future for this great country. Now, I know, my friends, tonight will be the last time we'll see each other together in the same room for several weeks. But make no mistake, I plan to see all of you back here after the next election. And just a few more. I've got to go off the script for a little bit. We're going to miss a few. We know we're going to miss Randy and John and Jim and Dale and Charlie and who have I forgotten? Daryl. Well, Daryl and Dave who are here tonight, all of you, thank you for being out. And Werner. All of you, see tonight I have my family here. It's great they can attend, but you're all of my family here. Everybody in this room and all of the people who are your members and your supporters, you're all a tremendous family. Lorraine, notre famille et moi comptons sur vous.
Lorraine, my family and I,
our family are counting on all of you in the difficult times to come, but more important, Canadians are counting on you to give them a clean, honest government for this country. Now, my friends, over the last few days, the Liberals have made it clear that their biggest issue is not wanting to face the voters. Given their position, I don't blame them. But let the Liberals complain about facing the people. We're interested in facing the future as a party and a country. This
election has nothing exclusively to do with the Montgomery Commission or the sponsorship program.
Justice Montgomery looked into the past. Where the money went, who stole it, who benefited from it. We are looking to the future, and we want to move forward and address the real priorities of ordinary Canadians.
Voters have many reasons to get rid of this government.
Given them all of these reasons, opposing the government, telling the truth about this government. Sometimes it's been a tough and often a very dirty job. But the men and the women in this room did not shrink from that task. But I know, my colleagues, I know that all of you have so much more to offer this country. I know I've witnessed in the past couple of years the remarkable loyalty, generosity you've developed for each other, the dedication to the country, the compassion you have for its citizens. Opposition is not enough for you. It's never enough to show the public just what we're against. We will offer them a positive vision for the future of this country. I'm going to say we must stand up for Canada. Changeons pour vrai. C'est exactement.
Let's really change. Let's change. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing in upcoming weeks.
Great country. Millions of Canadians are counting on us. Parents, working families, seniors, young Canadians, farmers, fishermen, miners, loggers, small business owners, immigrants, veterans, people like the people in this room. They're counting on us to stand up for them. Not just to address the cares and concerns they have, but more important than that, to speak to their hopes and to their dreams. Il faut faire le ménage, le vrai
we have
ménage,
to clean up, a real cleanup, the big cleanup. And that our government will be able to do. All my colleagues, particularly those from Quebec, we have to offer more to the Canadian people. The end of polarization that enabled this situation to prevail. We must offer a stronger Quebec within a better Canada.
Friends, it has seemed to me in the last couple of years that every day in the newspapers we read about privileged or powerful insiders. The latest is the income trust, how privileged and powerful insiders benefited from that. We read about these privileged and powerful insiders who are better off than they were 12 years ago. But we must ask ordinary Canadians, are you any better off? Under a Conservative government, we will tell them they will be better off. You all know that the coming weeks will not be easy. Je n'ai aucun doute.
I have no doubt that the Liberals are going to try to change our positions.
Tell the truth about their agenda that they have to tell lies about ours. But Canadians have seen this movie before. They know when the Liberals scream about us, it's just a diversion. It's like the thief who cries fire in a crowded restaurant, so when no one's looking, he can clear out the cash register. When Paul Martin comes after us, as he will, when he comes after me, as he's already planning, take that as a proof that we are on the right track, my friends. You know, I'm going to have to remind the people, he's the Prime Minister. He's been in power. And he plans to run against us. What does that tell you about his record? So set your sights not just on the next few weeks, but on the next few years and beyond. Because our vision will look that far ahead. Il faut changer pour vrai. Canadians
we have to change for real.
And they deserve a change. And to get that change, we need a change in government. We need an accountable government, un gouvernement pour vous tous,
a government for all of you, a government that respects you,
that stands up for Canada, a new Conservative government. Friends, as I say, tonight's the last bit of time we're going to be spending as a group for a few weeks. I'm going to see you all on the campaign trail. We've talked in this room. We've talked long and hard about what we need to do. Just remember in these next few weeks, Canadians will be counting on all of us. So work hard, stick together, stay strong, Godspeed, bonne chance, and we'll see you all at the finish line. Thank you.
Stephen Harper's speech to his MPs and his supporters in the Conservative Party caucus room. And interesting to listen to the Harper message tonight, one that says they're going to focus on what's ahead, not what's in the past, although still managing to mention quite a bit of the Liberal record of the past, specifically the Gomery situation. In a way, somewhat like Paul Martin's speech to his supporters, saying they're going to focus on their record, one that they're proud of, and yet at the same time raising all kinds of questions about what Stephen Harper may do. So you have the two main components of the battle that lies ahead in the election campaign, Harper and Martin with their messages. I want to whip around the last couple of minutes we've got before we've got to sign off. Keith, quick after hearing them both, and specifically Harper?
Well, Stephen Harper struck me right at the beginning of the speech when he quickly turned from saying that this was not just the end of the government, as you mentioned, not just looking past, but the beginning of a bright new future. And I think that indicates that they understand that they have to give Canadians a reason to vote for them and not just make them angry at the Liberals, because Stephen Harper has been criticized often enough already as being just an angry man, and that's part of the image that they have to change in this coming campaign.
Okay, we haven't heard from Don for a while, and I want to get his thoughts because he's been sitting back watching all the different comments, and I'm sure something has struck you that hasn't registered with us yet, Don, and what is it?
Well, I think a couple of interesting points. As we thought, Paul Martin came out as though he'd won the vote, not lost the vote. He did mention his record, and then he attacked Stephen Harper. Harper really still has us waiting. He's going to talk about the future, and he's going to look to the future, but we don't really know what that Conservative future is yet, and that, I guess, is what he's going to unveil in his campaign. You have to wonder, with all the announcements recently from the Liberals, what more they have to announce. The other thing that struck me was how down Jack Layton appeared to be. Both Martin, who was he appeared to be on a high, and Harper seemed confident and positive. Layton seemed almost despondent, and in fact I was surprised. He appeared to have a list of things he wanted to say in his hand as he was scrumming in the foyer. Now, the others, of course, had prepared speeches, and I thought that everything Layton said, he'd said 100 times before, so why he had a list, I'm not sure, but he didn't look very happy. Duceppe looked like Duceppe. It's interesting, Layton had to vote, he felt, the NDP felt they had to vote with the other two opposition parties to differentiate themselves from the Liberals. They don't want the argument that you and Keith were talking about before. You can vote NDP or you can vote Liberal, it doesn't really matter, and if you want to block the Conservatives, you have to vote Liberal. So he voted with the Conservatives to show he's not a Liberal and that the Liberals aren't him. So we'll see how that plays out, but he didn't seem very happy tonight.
All right, interesting strategy, in fact, by all of them. As Don says, Layton and Duceppe decided to speak from the microphone with reporters challenging them with questions. Even though, and Don's quite right, you saw Layton looking quite often at notes, which is unusual for him in a scrum situation. Martin choosing to speak from notes at the podium, Harper choosing to speak from a teleprompter. You could see the prompter at the side. Now, the reason that's interesting in the case of the two main parties, the Tories and the Liberals, is they didn't allow their leaders to be put in a position of being challenged by reporters on questions. They won't have that luxury tomorrow as they have opening news conferences before they hit the campaign trail. And we all know in past campaigns that those opening newsers can be a problem for leaders if they don't say the right thing as far as their party strategy is concerned. I want a last quick word from Susan Bonner, who's watched all this from the lobby outside of the House of Commons, which is going to be an awfully quiet place for the next couple of months. Still a bit of noise around there right now. Susan.
Yeah, there is, and there's a cabinet meeting going on just above me here. Martin's key cabinet ministers went into a meeting there, and they will be sneaking out the door here shortly when that meeting is over. But one thing strikes me looking at what we saw in those speeches from the leaders. Stephen Harper, of course, if elections are about a fight for the future, Stephen Harper made an interesting move this evening. You saw positioning some caucus members behind him as he delivered his speech, and those caucus members were youthful. They were the younger members of caucus, and a couple of them are, of course, from different ethnic